Hello and welcome to episode 2 of
Yeah.
the Culture Gym podcast. I'm Gareth Shackleton. I'm here with my co-host, Carly Richards. Hi, Carly.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well indeed. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
How's your week been?
My week, up and down, I'd say. So the kids, if anyone's listened to the first episode, I did say that my kids were going to be going back to school this week. I think I said that. So I was rather excited about that. And then it happened and they just went into meltdown, just did not want to go to school. So then I, for the first couple of days, I just ended up feeling like the worst mother in the world for putting them in this horrible environment that they clearly just did not want to be in. Where realistically, the environment was wonderful because they go to a wonderful school with wonderful teachers. However, after chat with his teacher and a great day yesterday, it was my son in particular who wasn't loving it. He came home from school yesterday and he'd had a really good day, which made all the difference because this morning they went in fine and I had this weight lifted off my shoulders and I was able to do all the things today that I the best of intentions to do all week with a smile on my face, which, yes, it's just, lockdown is just the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it?
It does, doesn't it? If you can get through that, the difficulty and the tragedy of it in many ways, lost lives and businesses that are struggling, some businesses that are struggling, then it does that. It's that opportunity that we've all been given to press the reset button and think about where it is that we're going and what we want to achieve and set some new goals and do some exciting new things. It's
there's definitely a lot of opportunity, but for parents with young children, it really does bring it home, for me anyway, when I think, right, so I'm here trying to do this with my kids and we've all had the same struggles in a way, just by having to look after our children for more hours in the day and juggle work and juggle the responsibility of work and the commitment to the employer and the commitment to whichever organization or business that we actually work for, or working for ourselves as we do. So I can, I suppose, empathize. I know your son's a bit older, but I can empathize with those who have smaller children.
It is. The biggest challenge for me with my son through this has been trying to encourage him to take advantage of the opportunity. Because, they're not going to school. They're doing some school work through the portals that have been set up, but it's not a full working day. It's not a full hours of school. And so to use that time productively and to give himself the best chance of being the best version of himself coming out of this, so that he's ahead of the pack, as it were, to do whatever it is he wants to do, without going into specifics of what he wants to do. We can maybe do that another time, but he's got some very specific goals, and but it's been easy for him to sit back, and I'm sure it's not just him, it's all teenagers, sit back and not recognize it as an advantage. So that's been a real challenge, to try and help him to see that it is an opportunity, and if he puts in some extra work, then he can really get ahead.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a similar thing to what you do with clients as well, isn't it? What any kind of coach or consultant does with their clients. Really try and help them see the opportunities that are available to any business. But at the same time, it's very hard because for them, they're having to and for all of us, we're having to get through the weeds and the emotional and the mental toll that it's taken on all of us to be able to see that opportunity.
Absolutely.
But we digress from the first part of our podcast, which is always, how has your week been? So how has your week been, Gareth?
Well, my week has been pretty good. Working with clients, helping them to, some of them get through the final phase of their lockdown. Still clients having to wait until, the next phase of lockdown is lifted. But those that are coming through now and can open up this weekend, lots of work going on there. So it's been good helping them to figure out priorities and get the right things done, and really make the most of that opportunity as they come out of this. So that's been good. And I think the other aspect is this, as you've said, working with families. Coaching your own families is probably one of the hardest things to do. It's easier to coach clients, but again, my son plays tennis, wants to take that forward as a career, and he's got himself motivated to do the extra work through the lockdown, and then got injured. So yeah, a real challenge this week, try to help him to rehabilitate and get back to tennis and playing again. So, but we'll get there through those frustrations of not being able to play.
Yeah. Oh well, I hope he gets better soon. I hope everything.
Yeah, it's one of those things. He wants to be ready before he is, and that's frustrating.
We all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure we're all guilty of that. But actually, what a really good word for this whole process, rehabilitation. Because for some people, that's exactly what it's all about. So,
yeah, you're right. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Actually, for me personally, I'm kind of at more of a transition phase in my own work, where I'm kind of coming out the other end of something and using this whole lockdown as a bit more of an opportunity. I found out this week that I'd won some seed funding to start a new project that I've been wanting to start for a really long time, and now that we're in this I suppose this opportunity phase, that's going to come into fruition, which is really good. So it's exciting. And yeah, for me, it's just work-wise, because talked about my family life, but work-wise, it's just starting a whole lot of new projects, I suppose, which is very exciting.
Yeah, it's always exciting starting projects, isn't it? Yes, keeping the momentum going and finishing them is more challenging for many people.
I know. I always seem to have so many ideas.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's just the thing with business owners. We have so many ideas and so many things that we want to do, but it's just finding the time and the motivation to get it done, isn't it? So I'm really excited that a few of those things are going to be happening now. Yeah. Actually, this is one of them, a new podcast.
That's right. And officially launched, as in
official.
Is online. Soon to be followed by
this. And everything. Yeah, my husband's in a band, and when he went on Spotify, he was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool! I'm on Spotify," and I can say the same thing.
Excellent. Point that out to him.
Yeah, no, not quite as rock and roll, but still.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
With 1 million followers one day.
You never know. Might have to work on our jokes if that's the case, but you never know.
Well, speak for yourself.
Okay. Fair enough. So we're going to switch it up a bit this week, aren't we? And we're going to go for the Q&A first, because we were asked a really important question this week. That is, what is culture?
That's right. Yeah.
What is organizational culture?
It's a defining question, really, isn't it? It's
yes.
Kind of the basic question before we get into anything about culture, Jim, and what we talk about and what we're doing.
Yeah.
What is culture? So, yeah.
Well, so we've looked into this, haven't we? Obviously, because of the nature of our business. And we know that there is no one collective definition of culture, but there are many definitions. And the consensus between all of them is that it's generally about values, a belief system within an organization that kind of shape the culture. And it's not a tangible thing necessarily, but it's more of a holistic, it's just there, and it always will be there, whether it's a brand new company or whether it's a company that's been around for many, many years, in which case the culture will be far more established and far more ingrained into the fabric of the building, if you like. Yep. But in a newer company, there will always still be a culture. It's perhaps just slightly underdeveloped. and waiting to blossom, if you like. But yeah, you had some interesting thoughts just before we started pressing record, didn't you?
Yeah. I want to make a joke about that, but I won't.
God, no.
Yeah, so yeah, culture. What's culture? And so I think it's about the standards. Yeah, so it is the values. I absolutely agree with the formal definitions that you can find anywhere on the internet. It is about the values and the beliefs and those shared values and beliefs that everybody has within the organization. But it's about what they do, and those values then define the standards and norms of behavior for the group, so that people know how to interact with each other without having to explain to each other how they're going to interact and be with each other. And when you walk into an organization, you get a feeling for the culture. As you've said, it's not tangible, but you do get a feeling based on the way people interact with each other.
Yeah.
And those unwritten rules about behavior. You walk into a meeting room and you see one chair is empty and left empty by everybody who goes in, because there's an unwritten rule there that's for the CEO or the team leader or whatever. Or you'll find somebody always sits with their back to the door or facing the door, or whichever their personal preference is, and everybody works around that because they know that's what that person's about. And even small things at that individual level, they're about the culture and about the way people respect and fit in with each other. So, but it's standards and norms of behavior, I guess, was the shorthand way.
Yeah. Yeah. So from a psychological point of view or a psychologist point of view, it's to measure that quantitatively would be a bit of a challenge, but we can certainly measure it qualitatively to be able to say, this is what it is, this is what people believe, this is what they think, and to kind of draw out perhaps consistent themes of what the whole what individuals in the whole of the organization think about the culture. And you'll probably find that there's a lot of consistency there. Not all of it will be good, but I'm sure majority of it will be, and not an awful lot of it will be bad. And if it's something that perhaps it's actually a really good way to define the culture of the organization, and something that we do with companies that we work with on organizational culture, is to be able to the very first step to get a grip of what the current culture is. Because quite often leaders and senior people in the organization can think it can be one thing, but in fact, in the grassroots of the organization, it's something very, very different.
Yep.
Or you can have pockets of certain cultures in one area of the business that don't match up with other areas, which is also an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, no, that's right. And it's also interesting when you look at the outward facing communication of an organization, and many websites, company websites, will have a list of their values on there, their mission statement. But actually, when you go into an organization and experience it and look around and see what's actually happening, you find that the real values that are defining the culture of that organization are quite different. And when you get that mismatch between the espoused values and the actual values of the organization, that can lead to conflict and confusion, and not always a good thing. So, one of the things to strengthen a culture is actually to have a deep look at what your values are.
Yeah.
And to define them properly. I think it's too easy to, often one of the exercises you see is, here's a list of values, pick the top 5 or top 7 or top 3 as your values, and exactly, grimacing there, because it might give you some insights, but it's probably not going to give you the real, non-negotiable real drivers of what your culture is, and the way that you you behave and act.
Yeah, we really have to start with identifying what it is. It's the first step. It's not about identifying what we want it to be.
Yeah.
It's about identifying actually what is it.
Well, that's right.
Really.
And it's okay to have aspirational values, isn't it? And
Oh, of course, yeah.
Um,
It's just perhaps not the first step. Or it's one of the first steps, but it's not the only first step, should I say.
it's a great coaching step as well, isn't it? Because if you can define where you are now, as in your current culture and values, but then define where you want to be, you can chart a path to get there and understand how to help your teams to go on that journey. And that's what coaching's all about too. So
yeah,
coaching step.
Yeah, and I think culture's a really interesting one with that process as well, because the risk is that you can work with organizations to help them change their culture or to help them improve their culture. But if their aspirations for culture is so far removed from what their culture actually currently is, that's where you definitely will encounter some issues, because then it's almost like we were saying last week. It's like you're giving, rather than improving what it is that they've got, you're trying to give them some sort of weird plastic surgery or something. You know, we compared the two last week. Yeah. And rather than going to the gym to improve what somebody already has and strengthen what somebody already has, it's like they're kind of trying to cheat and go the fast route, and that doesn't necessarily work. You do have to work, when it comes to culture, you do have to work with what you've got, because you can't just sack all of your employees and get new ones to develop new cultures and new social norms and new behaviors, because ultimately it comes down to the people and the values of the organization.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose you could sack all of your employees and
well, you could
all with new ones, and that might change the culture, but it may not be a good cultural starting point, given that you've just admitted to the whole world that you're quite happy to sack everyone.
Yes. Yeah. And also quite expensive, because the recruitment process is pricey.
That's right. So don't do that lightly. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're definitely, you and I, in agreement that it's about values, beliefs. So we're happy with the definitions and, you know, the behaviors of the organization. So great question and a good place to start. Yeah,
great place to start. It's good to have that definition in place. It means it's a good springboard for other discussions now, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And if someone has already listened, you never know, people might actually have already listened to episode 5 or whatever and be coming back to episode 2 to
that sounds like time travel right now.
Doesn't it? A little bit of Doc and Marty McFly situation going on.
Right. Listening to episode 5. Yeah.
So our topic then, moving on to our topic for the week. We had a few different ideas, didn't we, of what we could talk about this week, but as it's our second episode and we're currently in this whole lockdown situation, we thought it would be most valuable to discuss things that are going to kind of allow us to maintain that strength of culture during and post lockdown, if you like. We came up with 3 different things, didn't we?
Yeah, so again, just a little bit of intro to that from my point of view. I think you talk about culture and it's about people being together, isn't it, and working together. The interesting thing about the lockdown is that some people haven't been able to work, they've been put on furlough. So they're almost outside of the work environment. And then you've got people working from home, so they're working remotely. And then you may have some people working on site within a business, but with a very different feel about what's going on there. You know, we talk about culture being the norms of behavior, and now all of a sudden we've got a much reduced workforce working on site with different working practices and social isolation going on actually on site to try and keep people safe. So your whole set of impacts there on culture, because this whole workforce now has become dispersed, for want of a better word. And so you can imagine the impact of that on culture, and vice versa, is huge.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many different, I mean, as we said in the beginning, you know, it's the gift that keeps on giving. So many things that people maybe anticipated, but actually maybe didn't anticipate, that are now going to have to be dealt with. And hopefully not just dealt with, hopefully, you know, embraced and managed really well is the ideal, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, and the first part of that is always awareness, isn't it? And
Yes.
maybe the lockdown has given people, you know, leaders within businesses, a real chance to see what their culture is, because of the way that the lockdown and the dispersal of the workforce has magnified culture, or highlighted the strengths and the weaknesses of the culture.
Yes, I would imagine that a dare we say crisis, but a crisis like this, if nothing else, would do exactly that about the culture of an organization. And whilst perhaps on a day-to-day basis, leaders of an organization and perhaps even employees of an organization may think, yeah, we have a really strong culture here. You know, I enjoy working here. My employer cares about us employees, and you know, we seem to be doing well on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
But actually, when it comes to a crisis like this, does that then highlight areas within the culture of the organization that perhaps need improved? So the three, shall we go into all three?
Yeah, why not?
We start with one.
Use them, and then let's dig into each one.
Okay. So the three that we thought would allow us to maintain that strength of culture and a really positive culture for the organization coming out of the back end of this, the three things were resilience, which is a real big buzzword anyway in organizations before this all happened even, but certainly really important at the minute. Flexibility and adaptability. So that opportunity to be flexible and be adaptable. But also what's really important is the openness and the willingness to make those changes, to be flexible and adaptable. And if the two, while sound very similar, are subtly very different in that we can have the ability to be adaptable, but if we aren't willing to be adaptable, then we're never able to make the necessary changes to come out the other end successfully.
That's right, and vice versa, of course. You might have the openness to change, but not have the the culture for everybody to come along with that. You know, if you might want to change, but if you can't communicate that successfully within the organization, across the organization, or you can't bring people with you on that, with that change, then you know, you don't have that adaptability. So they are very different things. Yeah. So three things there that are important about a culture coming through the lockdown.
Yeah. Should we start with resilience? It seems to be the most obvious one. I mentioned that I read an article recently. It was written by a colleague of mine, Rob Baker, and it was all to do with, so rather than resilience, he was talking about buoyancy. And I found it really interesting in that buoyancy, and that resilience is great to bounce back from, which is essentially what we need in a crisis, but being able to remain buoyant all the time throughout that crisis is also really important too. Without it sounding too much like bobbing along doing very little.
Going with the flow.
I suppose. Sorry.
Going with the flow, just letting the current take you wherever.
Yeah. that's not necessarily the most ideal, but certainly being able to remain afloat, and not just remain afloat, but do it well, and being able to bounce back is incredibly important. And that's essentially what resilience is. I think a lot of people and businesses can mistake resilience for this kind of ongoing, we can always do well kind of thing, but that's certainly not in my field of work. Resilience is more about the ability to bounce back from problems, and to kind of bounce back well from problems. So that's what we're looking for in a resilient business. It's being able to face this challenge and bounce back stronger from it. Right. And there are many things that companies can do in order to maintain that resilience. We don't have time to go into them today, but perhaps we'll cover that in a later podcast. Yes. Certainly something that we work with other companies on during our kind of consultancy process of Culture Gym. So really important resilience.
Where do you think that resilience comes from? What are the features of culture, or of an organization's culture, that create resilience? Just briefly.
I think that certainly from a leadership perspective, it's a culture. How do you it's really difficult to describe, but it's being able to be challenged and keep a positive outlook, look for opportunities, remain flexible, just so in organizational psychology, we talk a lot about psychological capital as a concept, which is about on an individual basis, one's kind of ability to remain positive, hopeful, open, and adapt to change and maintain a positive outlook, if you like. So I would say that as a whole, you can perhaps have the same sort of thing for a business as well, that ability to remain positive, seek opportunity, and kind of come back from problems, and have, in a way, not that we could have foreseen the lockdown, but have a wee bit of a risk assessment for the whole organizational culture, for the whole of the organization. How are we going to tackle problems? How are we going to deal with this? And in a positive way, and be able to come back. That in itself is an organization showing its resilience by just doing an overall risk assessment for either its employees or for its finances, or whatever department you want to do one for. I think rather than just sitting back and accepting this is it, everyone's furloughed. I mean, some businesses have had to, but by doing nothing, it's actually the opposite of resilience in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out there is the importance of optimism, but not just blind optimism.
No,
that reminds me of the Jim Collins, the chapter in the Jim Collins Good to Great book of was it Colonel Stockdale? I'm sure someone can write in or comment on the podcast comments to correct me, but Colonel, or it's probably General Stockdale now, about being in a prisoner of war camp, and he describes the three types of person in the prisoner of war camp: the pessimists, who are always doom and gloom. We're never going to get out of here. We're going to die here. All that kind of stuff. And sure enough, they didn't do very well. But then you had the overt optimists. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. We'll be out of here by next week, or by Christmas, or by Easter, or and the date kept on moving on. But they were always positive and optimistic that they would get out and everything would be fine. And they didn't do very well neither. But the ones that thrived as much as possible in that kind of situation were the ones that kept that realistic optimism. The kind of, we can get through this. We can figure out a way. We'll be all right. Don't know when, we don't know how, but let's just, stick with it and get through this. And we will. And they were the ones that tended to do best. And that, to me, is part of what makes a person and an organization resilient. It's that kind of realistic optimism.
Yeah, it's a really good way of describing that, actually. Yeah.
I think Jim Collins calls it something else, but for me, that's kind of the wording comes to my mind is realistic optimism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So resilience, and then we mentioned this flexibility and adaptability and opportunity to be flexible and adaptable. And I've already mentioned there are some companies who have literally just had to shut up shop and say, actually, we have no choice. There is very little we can do. Other organizations, and I know you've got a couple of clients, and as have I, who have done this, is perhaps pivot their move as much online as they possibly could, even though they have had to shut their doors. And so this ability to be flexible is really important, especially for those companies who can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anything, this situation has been, this crisis has all been about adaptability. Those businesses that have done the best out of this have been the ones that have been able to adapt, who've found new ways to serve their customers or found new customers to serve even. Mm-hmm. And that level of being able to shift a whole organization is about adaptability. And maybe that's something where small businesses, SMEs, have an advantage over some of the larger corporates, because there's less inertia. There's more ability to adapt and to change. It's easier to bring everybody with you. Whereas with a large company with a large infrastructure, a large property portfolio, or fixed assets, it's much harder to adapt from a structural point of view, let alone a cultural point of view. Mm-hmm. But then to bring hundreds of thousands of people along on a journey of change is a much more difficult thing to do than to bring 100 along.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting to see the companies who've looked and actively searched out those opportunities, rather than kind of either waited or just kind of assumed that things will change and things will improve and we will be fine. It's obviously easy for us to sit here and discuss those companies, and it's much harder, I can appreciate, to be in that position and to try and find those opportunities and try and open your mind to the possibility of change, which probably leads us quite comfortably onto the third thing, which is this willingness and this openness to change, and this motivation, if you like, to be flexible and to change perhaps the core of the company that you have. If you're a face-to-face business who deals with customers on a face-to-face basis, this whole situation is dire. Mm-hmm. And some, for example, EasyJet, what can you do when no one is allowed to fly? It's not like you can go online and do something online. It's impossible.
Exactly.
But for those of us who are lucky enough to be in that position, to be able to move online perhaps, or deliver, actually delivering postal packages rather than in the shops, or restaurants moving to takeaway food or something like that, for us to be able to change and have that motivation and have that kind of necessary urge to succeed is really important.
It's also a almost an inherent conflict in business, isn't it? Because in business we want to have a clear strategy. We want to have a clear focus for how we're going to succeed. That strategy, and that involves making choices about what we will do and choices about what we won't do. And that rigidity that comes from that strategy is important because it helps us to succeed and follow one course without getting distracted from another idea or another opportunity. We're going to follow the opportunity that we've got. That's what strategy is all about. And yet at the same time, we have to keep in mind and keep this conflict in the front of our minds of, well, sometimes we do have to change. Sometimes we have to pivot. We might have a strategy, but we have to be open to that change that circumstances bring. And maybe that's been obvious in this situation because the change has been so dramatic and so huge that it's been easier to change for many people. But you've still got to be open to it. And as you've alluded to, not everybody's been able to do that. Some businesses have just had to or felt that they should just sit back and wait and see what happens. And others have completely changed their business model in many cases.
And with that willingness to change, and obviously the actual behavior of making those changes and doing the do, if you like, comes so many learnings, so many new opportunities, and so many more open doors that were closed off to you before. And so if you haven't done it already, if you have the opportunity, I would strongly recommend that you try and find the willingness and the openness to change, because some people that I've spoken to and some clients have completely changed so much about where they thought their business was headed, and it's opened up new opportunities that they never thought were at all possible. And so it's become this whole positive process for them, and something that they'll either continue on after this, continue on that journey, or perhaps bring some of the learnings and some of the experiences that they've had along with it whilst they kind of move back to the former journey that they were on. And so I think if you can, then certainly do, because it's full of possibilities and full of positive potential.
Yeah. So I guess one aspect of that is perhaps more about adaptability than openness to change, is doing that when you've got this dispersed workforce now, home workers, furloughed workers, workers on site. The leadership skills that you need in order to have that adaptability and communicate that across that dispersed workforce now, bearing in mind some of the sensitivities of a furloughed worker or a home worker to that change and how they would perceive that. And I think that's a really important consideration. Any advice for leaders, managers in this situation with a dispersed workforce about bringing people along with change or even maintaining resilience?
I think first and foremost, it's got to be about communication, and it's got to be about an appreciative form of communication, in that what is that person now going through? I mean, when you have everybody in the same building, in the same environment, you might not, you certainly never know what's fully going on inside someone's head or what's going on for them at home, but you have that opportunity to be able to kind of read them a little bit and be able to go and talk to them, and just for 30 seconds over making a cup of tea in the canteen or getting something from the canteen or whatever, and being able to say, is everything all right? How are you getting on? But when you can't see them and you can't go anywhere near them, and you know that they're in the place that you've never ever been before because they're at home and you've never been to their home, it's really difficult, I think, as a leader to be able to connect in a way that you would hopefully assume that leaders would want to connect with their employees. And so I think an appreciation and empathy for, you know, anything could be going on for them at home. Perhaps when they're having their latest Zoom call, they're trying to, you know, at the same time stop one child from, I don't know, stealing its 10th biscuit from the biscuit tin or something like that, you know.
Personal story.
Yeah, well, spoken from experience. Or something else to do with, they're thinking, oh, I've got to go and check in on my grandma in my lunch break, and I don't really want my boss to know that I'm leaving, or just anything could be going on for them. And I think to be able to empathize with the difficulties that employees on a personal level are facing, juggling everything, is really important, as well as, I know leaders have that pressure of keeping the business afloat, but that empathy and that communication is really important, and finding new ways to bring perhaps things like that catch up over coffee into the workplace now, currently, whilst we're all working virtually, I think is really important as well, without enforcing things. I think a lot of managers can talk about communication and enforce daily catch-ups, and for some people, particularly perhaps people of certain personalities, so introverts, for example, or people who don't rank very high on the openness scale, who just kind of want to be left to get on, you know, to enforce those daily catch-ups can feel quite pressured. So I think you have to listen to what the employees actually want to be able to support them through this process. And if your team or your staff level is massive, then you have to be able to empower your management team to be able to do that with their staff. I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree. All sounds a bit touchy-feely. What's in it for the business about bringing employees along in this way, and be, you know, working, paying attention to that empathy that you're talking about?
Well, I think we all know that leaders who care about their staff, particularly with the latest research over the last sort of 5 years, I'd say, on stress in the workplace, we know that it's massively important. We know that a happier workforce is a more productive workforce. It raises levels of performance, and that kind of, not to make it sound like a cliche, but that level of happiness at work, or that level of engagement, if you like, at work, rarely comes if there's high stress levels at work. And high stress levels can come from poor leadership, can come from poor culture, can come from all sorts of different places. But I think to be able to be an organization that cares about their staff and show that through communication with their staff is only ever good for business.
Yeah. And I think perhaps to summarize, it's that communication, that empathic communication, which leads to the resilience that you were talking about, and to the ability to change. You know, without that empathy to bring everybody along with you and to truly care about people in your organization, that resilience won't be there, and the adaptability won't be there. However much openness to change you have, and you want to change, and you want to pivot your business to, you know, down a different strategic path because of the change in front of you, you won't be able to do that without that empathic communication, which builds the resilience and adaptability.
Exactly. And being able to bring people along because they want to be brought along with you only increases motivation. And again, with lower levels of motivation in terms of the workplace, then you're talking about lower levels of performance, which potentially equals far less profits for the organization. So there's a monetary value to all of this as well.
Yeah, it's not just touchy-feely, is it? It's about, real tangible gains that can be made as well.
Yeah, which is of benefit to the organization, obviously,
yeah.
but as well as just the moral applications of, moral implications, sorry, of applying the things that we've discussed today.
Very good. Any final remarks, Carly, on
I'll probably, we'll probably finish the podcast and I'll think, oh, I should have said that and I should have said that. But no, I think we've got an awful lot to continue discussing, haven't we? There are so many. We talked about rabbit holes last week, and there are so many different things to discuss in terms of company culture, particularly at the minute, but also ongoing in terms of general issues within company culture and general solutions. There are many things that I'm looking forward to discussing going forward.
Me too. And I think the importance of culture for an organization, but also for the people in an organization, means that as we come out of lockdown and we go back to what, I hate the term new normal, but whatever this is the new normal is going to be, culture is going to be really important. And whether it's rebuilding the culture or rehabilitating the culture, or actually taking the opportunity to look at your culture and say, well, how can we develop that? How can we work out our culture so it's stronger, fitter, more resilient, more adaptable for the next time something like this happens, or even for the next change that we want to engineer ourselves, because we can do that now.
Yeah, it's about taking that control.
That's right. Looking at culture as being a pivot point for that.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's helps or impedes.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, and I think we're both really excited to be able to share our level of expertise on this topic too, aren't we? So,
and learn from others too.
Yeah, exactly. Which brings us on to the thing that we mustn't forget. We never know what to make, we're just having general discussions. But if you do want to get in touch, then by all means, send us an email, hello@culturegym.com.
.co.uk.
Sorry. hello@culturegym.co.uk. So email us, get in touch with us. There will be the website up and launched very soon. We will announce that in one of the next few podcasts, no doubt. But in the meantime, if you want to check out Gareth and I, we're on LinkedIn, where we all have our own websites too. So by all means, do that. And we look forward to the next podcast next week, episode 3.
Yeah. Until then, have a great week and enjoy your culture.
Yeah. Enjoy your culture. Is that a little bit cheesy, Gareth?
Probably, but I had to say something on the spur of the moment. So
we hadn't thought about the finish.
We'll cut it out.
We need to get a better finish for next week, right? Promise. Okay. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.